I planned every single detail of our fifth anniversary trip to the Maldives. But exactly 2 weeks before our flight, my husband stood in our bedroom packing his bags for a Disney cruise with his daughter and his ex-wife. He used my money to book their VIP suite. When he texted me from the airport saying his daughter needed both her parents, I simply smiled and sent my reply. The moment he read it, his face must have lost all its color. If you have ever been the invisible backbone of an ungrateful family, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe because you will want to hear exactly how I dismantled his entire life. My name is Maya. I am 34 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant here in Atlanta. For the past 5 years, I have been married to Jamal. To the outside world, we were the ultimate power couple. Jamal walked through life with the kind of effortless charisma that made people hand him opportunities. He dressed in tailored suits, drove a spotless luxury sedan, and called himself a business consultant. But behind the heavy oak doors of the custom-built home, I paid for the reality of our marriage, was recorded in ledgers, bank statements, and a mountain of quiet disrespect. The morning everything shattered was remarkably ordinary. The Georgia sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our master bedroom, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Jamal was standing at the foot of our king-sized bed, humming a soft tune as he zipped up his monogrammed leather weekender bag. Inside that bag were the imported Italian linen shirts I had purchased for him just a month prior. I bought them specifically for the humid ocean breeze of the Maldives, the destination I had chosen to celebrate our fifth wedding anniversary. I had spent months researching the private overwater bungalows, arranging my grueling work schedule so I could finally disconnect and celebrate our milestone. Instead, my husband was folding those exact shirts for a trip with his ex-wife, Chloe insists. Jamal said, not bothering to look up as he smoothed out the collar of a shirt. Aaliyah needs both her parents there for her 12th birthday, Maya. You have to understand, I am her father. I need to be present. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the mattress. My hands were folded neatly in my lap. I did not scream. I did not throw the heavy crystal vase sitting on my nightstand. My profession had trained me to process high-stakes situations with absolute emotional detachment. Forensic accountants do not react to the lie. We react to the numbers that prove the lie. And the numbers sitting on the glowing screen of my laptop resting on the bed beside me were screaming. You are going on a 7-day cruise with your ex-wife and your daughter on the exact week of our 5-year anniversary. I stated, my voice perfectly level. A trip you told me about 48 hours ago. Jamal finally looked at me, his handsome face contorting into an expression of practiced exhaustion. He ran a hand over his perfectly lined-up fade. Maya, please do not do this right now. Do not make Aaliyah's birthday about you. Chloe and I are just trying to co-parent effectively. You know Chloe gets dramatic if I do not show a united front. Stop being insecure and just be the bigger person. Be the bigger person. That phrase had been the soundtrack of our marriage. Be the bigger person when Chloe demanded Jamal spend every holiday morning at her townhouse. Be the bigger person when Aaliyah parroted her mother's disrespectful comments to my face. Be the bigger person when Jamal needed just one more loan to keep his failing consulting firm afloat. My eyes drifted from his defensive posture down to the laptop screen. I had logged into our primary joint account 15 minutes before he woke up. I was looking for a minor discrepancy in our monthly household budget. Instead, I found a massive, glaring wound in our finances. 3 days ago, a charge had posted, $15,000 paid directly to Disney Cruise Line. Under the transaction details, the booking type was crystal clear, VIP Family Suite. Jamal had not simply chosen to prioritize his ex-wife and his spoiled daughter over our marriage milestone. He had stolen my money to do it. The account he used was technically joint, but the funds inside it were entirely mine. My annual bonus from the accounting firm had landed last week, a hard-earned reward for catching a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme for a corporate client. I had moved a portion of it to our joint account to cover our upcoming property taxes. Jamal had taken that money, my long hours, my skipped lunches, my brilliant financial analysis, and handed it directly to Chloe in the form of a luxury vacation. I watched him cross the room to his dresser. He picked up the Rolex watch I had gifted him for his 30th birthday and strapped it onto his wrist. The absolute audacity of his movements was staggering. He was dressing himself in the armor of my success, using my wealth to play the role of the affluent provider for a family that constantly belittled my existence. "You will be fine for a week, Maya." Jamal said, his tone softening into that manipulative warmth he used whenever he wanted to smooth over his transgressions. "Use the time to relax. Go to the spa. You work too hard anyway. It will be a nice break for you." He walked over and leaned down, pressing a quick, careless kiss to my cheek. "You are a good woman for understanding, babe. I love you." I looked into his eyes, searching for any flicker of guilt, any recognition of the devastating betrayal he was enacting. There was nothing, just the shallow confidence of a man who believed he held absolute power over his environment. "Have a safe trip, Jamal," I said, my voice soft and even. He smiled, grabbing the handle of his weekender bag. "I will call you when we dock in the Bahamas." I listened to the heavy thud of his footsteps descending the hardwood stairs. I heard the front door open, followed by the distinctive chirp of the electronic lock disengaging. Through the bedroom window, I watched his Uber pull away from the curb, carrying my husband toward an airport and a life that completely excluded me. The second the car disappeared around the corner of our manicured suburban street, the final remnants of the submissive, accommodating wife vanished. The woman who had tried for 5 years to buy love and peace through financial support ceased to exist. In her place emerged a woman forged by numbers, logic, and cold, unyielding justice. I pulled the laptop onto my lap. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. For years, I had respected the boundaries of our marriage. I had trusted Jamal to manage his own business accounts, taking his word when he claimed clients were late on payments or contracts had fallen through. I had willingly carried the financial weight of our entire lifestyle because I believed in his potential. But the $15,000 cruise charge had shattered the illusion. I needed to see the complete picture. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I bypassed his simple passwords in less than 2 minutes. The digital footprint of his life opened up before me like a map of a disaster zone. I watched his live transactions rolling in. Just 30 minutes after he left the house, a new charge appeared on my secondary credit card, the one he carried for emergencies. $500 at an airport duty-free boutique. He was buying perfume for Chloe on my dime before they even boarded the plane. The burning in my chest was not sorrow. It was the white-hot clarity of profound disrespect. He was flaunting his absolute disregard for my boundaries because he believed I would never fight back. He believed my desire for a successful marriage outweighed my self-respect. I opened a new window and pulled up a draft document I had been working on in secret. It was a comprehensive legal and financial strategy. I had spent my career dismantling complex corporate fraud, tracking hidden assets across international borders, and holding corrupt executives accountable. Dismantling a financially hollow man who had mistakenly believed he could outsmart a forensic accountant would be the easiest job of my life. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, breaking the silence of the large empty house. The screen illuminated with a text message from Jamal. "Boarding now." Chloe was stressed about the bags, but I handled it. "My daughter needs both her parents there," smiling and happy. "Thanks for understanding, babe. See you in a week." I stared at the glowing text. He was so incredibly arrogant. He genuinely believed that throwing the word daughter into the conversation would immediately paralyze me with guilt, forcing me to accept my position at the bottom of his priority list. He thought his emotional manipulation was foolproof. I copied the text message and pasted it into a fresh email addressed to my lawyer. Then I opened my messaging app and stared at Jamal's name. I had already drafted my response. I had prepared the attachments. I had the legal notices, the bank closure confirmations, and the eviction filings ready to launch like a guided missile into his carefully constructed reality. I typed my reply slowly, ensuring every word was deliberate. "I completely agree. That is why you have plenty of time to be a full-time father now. I canceled the black card you used for the VIP suite. The joint account is closed." Oh, and my company just served Chloe her 24-hour eviction notice for the townhouse you fraudulently leased. Have a great cruise. Your bags are on the porch. I hovered my thumb over the send button. The temptation to drop the hammer immediately was overwhelming. But before I could press send, I needed to review the evidence. I needed to ensure my case was absolutely bulletproof. Because the truth was, this betrayal did not start today. The $15,000 cruise was just the final catalyst. To understand why my vengeance was going to be so absolute, so ruthlessly calculated, I had to look back at the exact moment I realized my entire marriage was a financial crime scene. The disrespect had reached its peak exactly 1 week prior, during a suffocating Sunday dinner that exposed the toxic ecosystem Jamal had built around me. I set my phone down next to the laptop, the unsent message waiting patiently on the screen, and allowed my mind to return to the dining room table where my family had shown me exactly who they were. The front door had barely clicked shut before I had my laptop open on the duvet. The screen illuminated the dimming bedroom, casting a cold blue glow over the space I had meticulously designed for us. I did not shed a single tear. Forensic accountants do not cry over missing funds. We track them. I logged into the primary joint account, bypassing the two-factor authentication I had set up myself. I watched his digital footprint move through the city in real time. An Uber charge for $45 hit the ledger. Then a breakfast charge at an upscale airport terminal restaurant for $82. He was treating them using the very money I had earned auditing corrupt corporate executives. But the true depth of his audacity did not fully register until a new pending transaction flashed across the screen. $520 at a luxury duty-free boutique. I clicked the merchant details to investigate the authorization code. It was a high-end perfumery. I knew exactly what he was buying. It was Chloe's signature scent. He was standing in the international terminal swiping my hard-earned bonus to buy his ex-wife her favorite luxury perfume before they boarded a premium cruise together. The disrespect burned in my chest, a slow and suffocating heat. For months, Jamal had complained about the rising cost of our household utility bills, urging me to cut back on my personal expenses. Yet here he was, effortlessly dropping $500,000 to make sure his ex-wife smelled perfect for their tropical getaway. It was not just the money. It was the absolute certainty he had in my submission. He believed I would simply swallow this indignity, just like I had swallowed every other slight, every passive-aggressive remark from his family, every boundary he had gleefully trampled over the past 5 years. He thought my silence was weakness. He did not realize my silence was a precise calculation. My phone vibrated against the mahogany nightstand. The screen lit up with a message from him. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the smooth glass. The text read, "My daughter needs both her parents there. Thanks for understanding, babe." I read the words 3 times. The manipulation was so practiced, so effortlessly executed. He was using a 12-year-old girl as a human shield for his own selfishness. He knew that by invoking Aaliyah's name, he was boxing me into a corner. In his mind, if I complained, I was the wicked stepmother denying a child her family. If I fought back, I was the bitter career-obsessed wife who did not understand the complexities of blended families. He had weaponized my own decency against me. He expected me to reply with a forced reassurance, perhaps a sad but supportive message telling him to have a safe flight. That was the script we had followed for half a decade. Whenever Chloe threw a tantrum and demanded his presence, I stepped aside. Whenever Aaliyah rudely dismissed the gifts I bought her parroting her mother's toxic coaching, I smiled and offered grace. I had played the role of the accommodating wealthy wife perfectly, but the script had been shredded the moment I saw that cruise charge. I minimized the banking window and opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop. I had spent the last 5 days building this file, applying the same ruthless precision I used to dismantle corporate embezzlement rings to my own marriage. Inside were 3 carefully prepared document files. I opened the first one. It was a formal confirmation from the bank. The joint account, which had held nearly $40,000 of my income, just a week ago, was now closed. I had legally redirected every cent of my original deposits back to my private accounts. I had calculated his actual contributions over the past 30 days, factored in his recent unauthorized withdrawals, and left a balance of exactly $4.32. It was the precise amount he actually owned. The second document was a confirmation from my credit card issuer, the premium travel card he was currently holding in his tailored pocket, the one he planned to use for frozen margaritas, shore excursions, and five-star dining experiences, had been deactivated. I had removed him as an authorized user completely. Furthermore, I had flagged his recent high-dollar transactions, including the cruise tickets and the perfume, for fraud review. The financial lifeline he had been feeding on was severed completely. The third document was my absolute masterpiece. It was a digital copy of a 24-hour eviction notice. It was not addressed to Jamal, it was addressed directly to Chloe. For years, she had bragged to anyone who would listen about her independent lifestyle in her luxury city townhouse. She loved to post pictures of her high ceilings and modern kitchen, presenting herself as a self-made woman who did not need a man. What she did not know, and what Jamal had desperately tried to hide from me, was that my private company was the legal guarantor of that lease. My late grandfather had left me a blind trust, a small holding company that I kept strictly separate from my marriage. He had always warned me to protect my assets, telling me that a smart woman always keeps her own safety net hidden. Jamal had somehow accessed those corporate credentials and fraudulently used my company to secure a home for his ex-wife. He had literally put my generational wealth on the line to keep his ex comfortable. The eviction notice had already been handed to a process server. Chloe was about to return from her luxury vacation to find her designer furniture sitting on the sidewalk. I opened the messaging app and stared at his text. He was likely standing at the boarding gate right now, perfectly confident, perhaps handing Chloe her new perfume, waiting for my predictable, submissive reply. He probably had his arm around Aaliyah, playing the role of the devoted family man, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging down toward his neck. I began to type. My fingers moved with absolute certainty, striking the digital keys with the force of a gavel. I completely agree, I wrote. That is why you have plenty of time to be a full-time father now. I canceled the card you used for the VIP suite. The joint account is closed. Oh, and my company just served Chloe her 24-hour eviction notice for the townhouse you fraudulently leased. Have a great cruise. Your bags are on the porch. I stared at the message. It was a loaded weapon pointed directly at the hollow foundation of his life. I knew exactly what would happen the second I hit send. The card would decline at the boarding desk. The luggage fees would bounce. The carefully maintained facade of the wealthy, providing father would crumble right in front of his ex-wife and his daughter in a crowded airport terminal. I hovered my finger over the send button. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. The urge to deploy the destruction immediately was intoxicating, but to understand how we reached this point of absolute annihilation, to understand why a simple canceled anniversary trip warranted the complete dismantling of a man's entire existence, you have to look back. You have to rewind exactly 1 week to a Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law Brenda's house. That was the day the mask finally slipped. That was the day I realized my marriage was not just a failure. It was a sprawling, toxic financial crime scene, and I was the only one footing the bill. The digital glow of the laptop screen faded from my vision as my mind pulled me backward, returning to the exact moment the blindfold had begun to slip from my eyes. It was exactly 7 days ago. Sunday afternoon. The air inside my mother-in-law Brenda's formal dining room was thick and suffocating heavy, with the scent of roasted lamb collard greens and the overpowering cloud of her signature floral perfume. Brenda loved to host the senior ladies of her megachurch after the morning service. She treated her pristine Atlanta McMansion like a royal court where she reigned supreme, and these Sunday dinners were her weekly opportunity to hold court. I stood in the arched doorway of the dining room, gripping the handle of an expensive artisan cake I had rushed across town to buy, between my morning work meetings, feeling completely like a stranger crashing a private exclusive party. Sitting right at the center of the massive mahogany table, occupying the seat of honor directly next to my husband, was his ex-wife, Chloe. Jamal sat entirely relaxed, his broad shoulders draped casually over the back of his chair, leaning in with a soft smile as Chloe whispered something in his ear. Between them sat 12-year-old Aaliyah, completing the visual of a perfect unbroken nuclear family. I was the legally wedded wife, the woman whose name was on the mortgage documents hidden in a filing cabinet upstairs. But in Brenda's house, I was always treated like the unwelcome interloper who had interrupted their perfect lives. Brenda was holding court with Sister Margaret and the other church elders at the opposite end of the table. She was speaking loudly, ensuring her voice carried easily over the clinking of crystal glasses and silver flatware. She was recounting a highly embellished story about Chloe's unwavering dedication to motherhood. Brenda spoke passionately about traditional family values, praising women who understood their divine submissive place in the home and who put their families above worldly ambitions. Every single word she spoke was a calculated, sharpened weapon aimed directly at me. Chloe sat there soaking in the praise, offering a modest, practiced smile while delicately adjusting the sleeves of her designer cardigan. I took the only available seat left at the far end of the table. Jamal finally looked up as I pulled out my own chair. He offered me a weak, non-committal smile and immediately went back to his hushed conversation with Chloe. He did not stand up to greet me. He did not pull out my chair. He did not ask how my morning conference calls with my overseas accounting clients had gone. He simply allowed me to fade into the background of his life, perfectly content to let his mother and his ex-wife dominate the space. After the main course was cleared away, Brenda emerged from the sprawling kitchen carrying a massive steaming peach cobbler. The room fell into an expectant hush as she sliced the first piece. It was the largest piece, the one with the perfect golden crust. She walked right past her own son and right past me, carrying the fine china plate with exaggerated care. She placed it delicately directly in front of Chloe. Brenda patted Chloe's shoulder, her hands resting there a moment too long, and sighed loud enough for the entire room to hear. "It is just so incredibly wonderful to have a real mother sitting at this table," Brenda announced, her eyes darting toward me. "A woman who actually knows that raising a child and nurturing a husband takes priority over absolutely everything else in this world. Some women just care more about their spreadsheets and climbing corporate ladders than building a warm Christian home." The silence that followed her statement was deafening. Sister Margaret looked down at her lap, suddenly very interested in her linen napkin. I looked directly at Jamal across the long table. I waited for my husband to defend me. I waited for the man I loved to clear his throat and remind his mother that my corporate spreadsheets and long hours were the sole reason Brenda was currently enjoying a brand new roof on this very house. I waited for him to defend the woman who had paid off his car and funded his lifestyle. But Jamal just stared intently at his water glass. His jaw was tight, but his mouth remained firmly shut. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose his mother's comfort and his ex-wife's fragile ego over his own wife's dignity. I swallowed the hard, bitter lump of humiliation rising in my throat and forced a tight, polite smile onto my face. I absolutely refused to give them the dramatic emotional reaction they were all so desperately trying to provoke. I am a forensic accountant. I do not throw tantrums. I gather data. The heavy, uncomfortable tension was suddenly broken by Aaliyah. She slammed her hands flat on the mahogany table, completely ignoring the adults' quiet conversations, and turned her attention directly to me. She did not ask, she demanded. She wanted the absolute newest iPhone that had dropped that week. She rattled off the exact model, the maximum storage capacity, and the specific titanium color she expected to receive. She spoke to me not as a parental figure, but as an ATM machine that was taking too long to dispense cash. I took a deep, steadying breath, trying my best to lean into the role of a responsible, caring step-parent. I spoke to her gently, explaining that a phone that expensive required a serious conversation about responsibility and financial literacy. I suggested that we could sit down after dinner, look at our monthly household budget, and figure out a reasonable chore chart so she could earn a portion of the money herself. It was a standard, responsible parenting response, meant to teach her the value of a dollar. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed harshly off the high dining room ceilings. She reached over and stroked Aaliyah's hair, shooting me a look of absolute, unvarnished disdain. "Do not listen to her, baby," Chloe sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. "You do not need to worry your pretty little head about any silly budgets or ridiculous chore charts. We do not do things like that in this family. Daddy will buy it for you tomorrow after school. He is the provider of this family. He always takes care of his girls." Jamal physically puffed out his chest at her words. He leaned back in his chair, completely embracing the unearned title of the wealthy, benevolent provider. He smiled down at Aaliyah, kissing the top of her head, and loudly promised that they would go straight to the luxury tech store the minute she finished her classes the next day. The church ladies sitting around the table murmured their collective approval, nodding at what a strong, generous, and traditional father Jamal was. But as I sat there in the corner watching this absurd theatrical performance unfold, a cold and highly clinical suspicion began to take deep root in my brain. My forensic instincts, the exact same instincts I usually reserved for unearthing massive corporate fraud and tracking offshore accounts, suddenly locked onto my husband with terrifying clarity. I knew the exact balances of our shared accounts. I knew that Jamal's boutique business consulting firm had not brought in a single legitimate paying client in over 6 months. I knew his primary business checking account was currently overdrawn by nearly $400 because I had accidentally seen the urgent bank alert flash across his phone screen just 2 days prior. I knew he was quietly drowning in high-interest credit card debt that he mistakenly thought he was keeping hidden from me. The man was completely and utterly broke. He had zero verifiable income. Yet here he was, sitting at the head of his mother's lavish table, brazenly promising to drop over $1,500 on a smartphone for a 12-year-old like it was loose pocket change. He was buying Chloe expensive designer gifts. He was paying for their luxury weekend dinners. He was walking around in tailored suits and driving a car that required premium fuel. Where was the money coming from? The math simply did not make sense. And in my professional world, when the math does not make sense, it means someone is stealing. I did not say another word for the rest of that suffocating Sunday dinner. I just sat back and watched them all. I watched Brenda shower him with unearned praise. I watched Chloe use him for his perceived status. And I watched Jamal play the role of the wealthy king. I realized with sickening clarity that I was entirely funding a stage play where I had been deliberately cast as the villain. That dinner was the spark. It was the exact moment I realized I needed to stop acting like a loving, supportive wife and start acting like a ruthless, uncompromising auditor. The clinking of silverware against fine china resumed as Brenda poured more coffee for her church friends, the rich aroma blending with the lingering sweetness of the peach cobbler. The conversation naturally shifted from Aaliyah's promised iPhone to the broader, more dangerous topic of family finances. That was the exact moment Connor decided to share his completely unsolicited expertise. Connor was Tasha's husband. He wore a pristine fleece vest indoors and spoke with the unearned, loud confidence of a mediocre mid-level bank manager. He swirled his bourbon glass, letting the large square ice cube clink loudly against the crystal to draw the room's attention, and leaned his weight across the heavy mahogany table directly toward me. "Maya," he began, his voice dripping with that specific brand of arrogant condescension. "I was looking at the market trends this week. You know, with Jamal carrying so much of the heavy financial weight with his consulting firm, you really should consider letting him handle your primary investment portfolio. It is just too much stress for you to manage on top of your little accounting job. The market requires a certain aggressive masculine instinct that Jamal naturally possesses. You should let the man of the house do what he does best. A little accounting job." I sat perfectly still, processing the sheer breathtaking audacity of his statement. I managed the forensic audits for multinational corporations. I tracked offshore tax havens, dismantled corporate money laundering rings, and testified as an expert witness in federal court. Connor managed checking accounts and auto loans for local bakeries. Yet here he was confidently instructing me to hand my generational wealth and my hard-earned stock portfolio over to a man whose primary business checking account was currently $400 in the red. I slowly turned my gaze to Jamal. I waited for my husband to correct his brother-in-law. I waited for him to laugh to firmly remind Connor that his wife was a financial genius who out-earned every single person at this table combined. I waited for just a fraction of loyalty. Jamal simply nodded along, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his iced water. He let the silence stretch actively, allowing his brother-in-law to strip away my professional dignity right in front of his ex-wife. Before I could formulate a perfectly polite, razor-sharp response that would cut Connor down to size, Tasha eagerly chimed in. Tasha thrived on being the absolute center of attention, and she saw an opportunity to elevate her own status. She leaned over her half-eaten plate, speaking loudly enough to ensure every single church elder at the far end of the dining room could hear her clearly. Connor is absolutely right, Tasha announced proudly, waving her manicured hand in the air. Jamal is just incredible with money. He is the true rock of this entire family. I mean, look at what he did for us just last month. He just casually paid off the entire remaining loan on my luxury SUV. He called me up out of nowhere and said he could not stand the thought of his little sister driving around with heavy bank debt hanging over her head. He just wiped it out. He is so generous and so traditional. We are just so blessed to have a real provider in the family. Sister Margaret immediately clapped her wrinkled hands together, loudly praising the Lord for raising up such strong, providing men. Brenda beamed at her son from the head of the table, her chest puffing up with absolute maternal pride. Chloe shot me a sideways calculating glance. Her eyes were shining with malicious triumph, silently mocking me. She was looking at me as if to say, look at how your husband spends his massive wealth on every single woman in his life except you. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted a sharp tang of copper. I kept my face arranged in a mask of pleasant, relaxed neutrality. But underneath the heavy wooden table, my hands curled into tight, trembling fists. Tasha did not know the truth. Brenda did not know the truth. Chloe certainly did not know the truth. But Jamal knew. Jamal knew exactly how that luxury SUV was paid off. 6 weeks ago, Jamal had crept into my home office at 2 in the morning. He had locked the heavy doors behind him, collapsed into the chair across from my desk, and literally started weeping. He confessed that Tasha was 3 months behind on her exorbitant car payments, and the bank had just issued an aggressive repossession order. He begged me to help her. He pleaded with me to use my upcoming quarterly performance bonus to clear her debt and save her from public humiliation. And then he asked for the ultimate crushing favor. He asked me to let him take the absolute credit for the payment. He cried about how his family already looked down on him because I was the primary breadwinner. He claimed that if his mother and sister knew his wife had to bail them out, it would completely destroy his manhood and his respected position as the eldest son. He played on my empathy. He played on my vows to support him through better or worse. Because I loved him, and because I desperately wanted to protect his fragile, crumbling ego, I agreed to the lie. I silently transferred $22,000 of my own hard-earned bonus money directly into his account so he could write the cashier's check to the auto lender. I sacrificed my own financial reward, a reward I earned working 80-hour weeks to save his sister from having her car towed out of her suburban driveway. And this was my repayment. They were weaponizing my own generosity against me. They were using my silent financial sacrifices to build a towering pedestal for Jamal, and then standing on that exact same pedestal to look down on me. This was the ultimate black tax, a relentless draining of my resources to prop up a family that despised my very existence. They were actively mocking me with my own wealth. I looked slowly around the dining room table, absorbing every detail of the scene. I looked at Brenda beaming with toxic pride. I looked at Tasha bragging about a car she did not earn. I looked at Chloe smirking as she planned how to spend more of her ex-husband's supposed fortune. I looked at Connor swirling his bourbon secure in his mediocre male privilege. And finally, I looked at Jamal, who was soaking up the unearned praise like a sponge, completely comfortable participating in my public humiliation. They all thought I was blind. They thought I was a quiet, submissive, desperate woman who would just keep quietly writing checks to buy their elusive acceptance. They believed I would play the role of the silent bankroller forever. I smiled. It was a genuine, chilling smile that none of them understood or even noticed. I reached out and took a slow, calm sip from my water glass, my posture perfectly relaxed. Right at that exact second, a sharp, distinct vibration buzzed against my thigh. My phone was resting face up in my lap, completely hidden beneath my heavy linen napkin. I did not break eye contact with the room immediately. I waited for Tasha to launch into another loud story about her country club, ensuring all eyes were off me. Then I casually glanced down at my lap. It was a secure, encrypted alert from Marcus. Marcus was a highly specialized, ruthless private investigator I had retained exactly 3 weeks ago. When the math of my life had first started looking blurry, when Jamal's excuses about delayed client payments stopped making logical sense, I did not cry and I did not confront him. I hired a professional to follow the paper trail. I hired a ghost to dig through the digital trash of my husband's life. The bright notification illuminated the dark space under the table, casting a faint glow on the fabric of my dress. I read the text preview perfectly clearly. Target financial dossier complete. All banking records, wire transfers, hidden corporate assets, and encrypted communication logs have been secured and verified. Check your secure inbox for the full report. I let my thumb rest lightly against the edge of the phone screen. The final damning puzzle pieces had officially arrived. I did not need to ask Jamal where the money was going anymore. I did not need to wonder why his business was always failing while his family was always thriving. I was about to read the exact coordinates of his financial destruction. I slowly pulled the napkin back over the screen, hiding the glowing confirmation of his impending ruin. I looked back up at my husband, who was still laughing at something Chloe had said, and I realized I did not love him anymore. I felt nothing but a cold, calculating anticipation for the war that was about to begin. The digital clock in the corner of my monitor ticked past 2 in the morning. The house was perfectly silent. Down the hall in our master bedroom, Jamal was sleeping soundly, his breathing deep and rhythmic. He had fallen asleep the moment his head hit the pillow, completely unburdened by the staggering amount of lies he had paraded at his mother's dinner table just hours ago. I had waited in the dark until I was certain he was deep in sleep. Then I slipped out from under the heavy duvet and walked barefoot to my home office. This room was my absolute sanctuary. It was a space built entirely on logic, cold, hard facts, and absolute transparency. I locked the heavy oak door behind me, turned on the desk lamp, and booted up my triple-monitor workstation. My hands were perfectly steady as I typed in my decryption keys and opened the secure file Marcus had sent me. I did not just read the private investigator's report, I dissected it. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to see the stories hidden within ledgers and spreadsheets. Money does not lie. It leaves a permanent trail. It speaks the truth when people refuse to. I started by mirroring the hard drive of Jamal's personal laptop, which he had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. Bypassing his security was almost insultingly easy. His password was a painfully simple combination of his birth year and his college fraternity letters. I synced his digital files with the banking records Marcus had pulled. I was looking for the leak, the exact mechanism Jamal was using to drain my resources and fund his elaborate facade. What I found in those files was not just a minor financial leak. It was a massive gaping sinkhole that swallowed my reality whole. For the past 3 years, Jamal had walked out of our house every single morning, dressed in custom Italian wool suits, claiming to be heading to his prestigious business consulting firm. He talked endlessly at dinner about his client acquisitions, his aggressive market strategies, and his high-stakes contract negotiations. He complained about the stress of managing his employees. He projected the image of a titan of industry. The financial dossier revealed the staggering truth. The consulting firm was an absolute ghost. 3 years ago, his state business license had been officially revoked for failure to file annual reports. His corporate tax returns showed exactly $0 in generated revenue for 36 consecutive months. There were no corporate clients. There were no high-stakes negotiations. There were no employees. The prestigious downtown office address he listed on his embossed heavy cardstock business cards was nothing but a virtual mail drop box that cost him $40 a month. My husband was a hollow man. Every single dollar he had spent, every luxury car lease he signed, every round of premium drinks he bought to impress his friends, every extravagant gift he bestowed upon his family was siphoned directly from my accounts. He had constructed a complex web of automated transfers, moving small, inconspicuous amounts from my secondary business accounts into his personal checking. He kept the transactions just under the threshold that would normally trigger my bank fraud alerts. He had turned my 80-hour work weeks, my stress and my brilliance into his own personal ATM. He was building an empire of smoke and mirrors entirely on my back, all while allowing his family to treat me like an unwanted burden. I sat in the glow of the monitors, processing the sheer, breathtaking scale of his parasitism. I felt a cold knot of pure rage tighten in my stomach. He had looked me in the eye every single night and lied about his entire existence, but my trained eyes could not stop scanning the data. As I dug deeper into his transaction history, looking for exactly where all my stolen money was going, I caught something even more sinister hidden within the chaos of his reckless spending. Among the daily coffee shop charges, the expensive lunches, and the retail purchases, a very distinct pattern emerged. It was a perfectly regular automated wire transfer. $3,000 moved on the first day of every single month without fail. The transaction was vaguely labeled in his ledger as independent contractor business expenses. Most people, or even a standard accountant, would have glanced right past it, assuming it was a routine monthly retainer for a software vendor or a marketing consultant. But I was not a standard accountant. I followed the routing numbers. I tracked the digital fingerprint of the receiving institution, bypassing the generic shell company name attached to the destination account. I meticulously peeled back the layers of financial obfuscation Jamal had clumsily attempted to construct to hide the destination of these funds. The receiving account did not belong to a vendor. It did not belong to a freelance consultant or a business partner. The routing numbers bypassed the corporate banking system entirely and traced directly back to a personal checking account at a local credit union right here in Atlanta. I ran the account holder credentials through the database to verify the identity of the person receiving $3,000 of my money every month. The screen refreshed, displaying the legal name of the sole proprietor of that account. It was Brenda. I isolated the $3,000 recurring transfer, highlighting the raw data on my left monitor. Brenda. What could a retired woman living in a sprawling McMansion that had been completely paid off for over a decade possibly need with $36,000 a year in untraceable cash? I opened a secondary window, fired up a secure proxy network, and pulled the public financial disclosures and donor recognition lists for her massive, highly publicized megachurch. I cross-referenced the names against the congregation tiers. There it was, glowing brightly on the screen. The platinum pillar level. It was the absolute elite circle of church elders, the VIP section of the congregation, who received priority parking, private catered dinners with the senior pastor, and unquestioned moral authority over the rest of the flock. The minimum annual donation required to maintain that wholly untouchable status was exactly $36,000. Jamal was not just quietly subsidizing her grocery bills. He was literally purchasing her religious superiority using the exact money I earned dismantling corporate supply chain fraud. Every single time that woman looked down her nose at me for not being a proper submissive wife, every time she loudly praised women who stayed home, she was doing it from a golden pedestal financed entirely by my 80-hour work weeks. I pivoted my attention to the secondary credit lines. I had always trusted Jamal to manage the household travel cards, assuming the balances were paid in full from his consulting revenue. I ran a script to pull the raw, unfiltered transaction data directly from the issuer. The spreadsheet populated with hundreds of rows of exorbitant high-end charges spanning the last 24 months. 5 nights at a 5-star holistic wellness retreat in Tulum. A luxury ski chalet rental in Aspen during peak season. A private fully staffed catamaran charter in St. Bart's. I opened a new browser tab and navigated directly to Tasha's public Instagram page. I methodically matched the dates and locations of the credit card authorizations to the dates of her smug, heavily filtered vacation posts. My amazing hubby spoiled me again. Read one caption under a picture of Tasha clinking crystal champagne flutes with Connor on the teak deck of the St. Bart's catamaran. Connor, the man who had just spent 30 agonizing minutes mansplaining wealth management to me while swirling his bourbon. The man who boldly suggested I hand over my investment portfolio to his brother-in-law because I lacked the masculine instinct for finance. Connor was not a financial prodigy. He was completely, unequivocally broke. I ran a soft pull on his public financial records and court filings. The man was drowning. He had 3 separate accounts sitting in active collections, a maxed-out credit utilization ratio, and a credit score that would not even qualify him for a basic store discount card. Jamal had been acting as their personal luxury travel agency, floating his sister's extravagant marriage entirely on my corporate credit lines. Connor was not a traditional provider. He was a highly subsidized freeloader living his best life on my dime. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, letting the harsh blue light from the monitors wash over my face. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sickening, heavy finality. It was not just Jamal. It was all of them. The sheer, staggering cruelty of the situation settled deep into my bones, replacing the initial shock with a freezing, calculated focus. For years I had assumed they were simply toxic, territorial people clinging to their son and brother. I thought they genuinely believed Jamal was a wildly successful businessman, and that I was just the cold corporate wife who did not know how to nurture him properly. I was wrong. They knew. Every single one of them knew exactly what was going on. You do not accept $36,000 a year in secret wire transfers without knowing exactly where the money originates. You do not let your brother pay off your luxury SUV to stop it from being repossessed, and then let him fund your tropical vacations if you genuinely think his business is thriving independently. They all knew Jamal was a bankrupt fraud. They knew he had not closed a legitimate deal in 3 years. They knew I was the sole financial engine keeping their entire grand facade from collapsing into the dirt. And instead of showing a single ounce of gratitude, instead of offering basic human respect to the woman keeping a roof over their heads and designer labels on their backs, they chose to actively, ruthlessly humiliate me. They mocked my career because my career was the very thing that made them feel inadequate. They praised his fake masculinity to keep him pliant, secure, and generous with my funds. They tore me down at every Sunday dinner, delivering thinly veiled insults and demanding expensive gifts to keep me off balance. It was a brilliantly coordinated psychological operation. They needed to ensure I remained the quiet, exhausted workaholic who paid all the bills, swallowed their disrespect, and never asked too many questions. My breathing slowed. My heartbeat leveled out into a steady, predatory rhythm. I was no longer a wife grieving a broken marriage. I was an apex predator surveying an ecosystem I was about to completely dismantle. I closed the credit card statements and turned my attention back to Marcus's dossier. There was one final subfolder sitting at the very bottom of the directory. Unlike the other files, this one was protected by a secondary layer of military-grade encryption. Marcus had left a brief text note attached to the file path. He warned me that this specific document had been buried deep, hidden intentionally behind 3 separate dummy corporations and an offshore proxy server. It was the only thing Jamal had worked incredibly hard to keep completely invisible. I typed in the complex decryption key Marcus had provided. The progress bar inched across the screen, decoding the data byte by byte. The folder finally clicked open. A single high-resolution PDF document loaded onto the center screen. It was not a hidden bank statement. It was not a secret credit card bill. It was a certified, legally stamped property deed. I zoomed in on the high-resolution PDF, my eyes scanning the dense, complicated legal jargon with practiced efficiency. It was a certified, legally stamped property deed serving as a master commercial lease agreement. The document was formatted with rigid, uncompromising structure, complete with official notary stamps, municipal seals, and banking watermarks. The property address listed at the top of the very first page was instantly sickeningly familiar. It was the exact address of the exclusive gated luxury townhouse complex located right in the heart of Buckhead. It was the exact same luxury townhouse Chloe loved to constantly brag about to the entire church congregation. For the past 2 years, Chloe had been posting perfectly staged, meticulously filtered photos of her grand sweeping marble staircase, her custom gourmet chef's kitchen, and her private manicured courtyard. She constantly captioned these photos with aggressive quotes about being a strong, independent, self-made woman who did not need a man to provide for her. She loved portraying herself as a triumphant queen who had vastly upgraded her lifestyle post-divorce. I had always assumed her wealthy new boyfriend, or perhaps a silent business investor, was quietly footing the exorbitant monthly rent. I scrolled down to page 4, my eyes dropping to the bottom right corner. The guarantor section. The bright screen seemed to magnify the stark black text. Jamal had not signed as the primary financial guarantor. He simply could not. His personal credit score was a smoking crater, his debt-to-income ratio was completely toxic, and his verifiable income was entirely non-existent. No luxury leasing management company in the entire state would ever hand him the keys to a multi-million-dollar property based on his fake consulting credentials. The guarantor listed on the binding legal document was a private corporate entity. It was my private corporate entity. My late grandfather had worked his entire life to build a legacy, ultimately leaving me a blind trust. It was a fiercely protected, highly classified holding company that managed a portfolio of commercial assets and generational wealth. I kept it strictly separate from my marriage, protected by layers of impenetrable legal walls and encrypted servers. Jamal knew the trust existed in theory, but he was never ever supposed to have the specific credentials. Yet right there, staring back at me in crisp black and white, was the exact legal name of my LLC. Directly next to the company name was my highly classified employer identification number. Below that string of digits was a forged digital signature. It was a frighteningly accurate, meticulously copied replica of my own corporate authorization stamp. The absolute depth of the betrayal hit me like a physical strike to the chest. Jamal had not just borrowed a few $1,000s to help his sister pay a car note. He had systematically bypassed my home office security, dug through my physical safe, stolen my private corporate credentials, and fraudulently bound my grandfather's legacy as the absolute financial backing for his ex-wife's luxury lifestyle. If Chloe missed a single rent payment, if she caused structural damage, if she decided to completely trash the pristine property and walk away, the corporate leasing management company had full, unmitigated legal authority to bypass Jamal entirely and seize my assets. He had literally put my generational wealth, the safety net my grandfather had bled to build, onto a public chopping block just to ensure the woman who openly despised me could sleep in a master suite with vaulted ceilings. He had weaponized my bloodline to buy his ex-wife's loyalty. A profound, chilling silence settled over my home office. The hum of the computer tower seemed to fade away entirely. Just 5 minutes ago, I was a woman mourning the slow, agonizing death of my marriage. I had felt the heavy, familiar sting of heartbreak, the crushing weight of wasted years, and the profound sorrow of broken vows. I had pitied myself. But looking at that forged signature, looking at the ultimate, unforgivable disrespect stamped onto a binding legal contract, every single trace of human sadness instantly vaporized. The grief burned away in a fraction of a second, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated, highly calculated rage. I did not shed a single tear. My hands did not shake. My breathing did not hitch. Forensic accountants do not cry over fraudulent documents. We prosecute them. I leaned forward and began to work with terrifying speed. I methodically exported the entire dossier Marcus had compiled. I downloaded every single wire transfer log, every fraudulent credit card statement, every piece of metadata proving Jamal had accessed my secure network, and high-resolution copies of the forged lease agreement. I duplicated the files, saving one massive encrypted folder to a hidden partition on my physical hard drive, and transmitting another backup copy directly to an offshore cloud server. I was building a watertight, impenetrable vault of evidence. I stripped away his digital camouflage and laid his entire criminal enterprise bare. I verified the timestamps on the digital forgery. Jamal had executed the documents exactly 2 years ago, right around the time he had convinced me to take a 2-week business trip to London. He had used the empty house to rifle through my secure files, carefully lifting the EIN and the corporate seals while I was across the ocean, working to support our household. He had planned it with cold, deliberate malice. I closed the final folder and let the screensaver plunge the room back into darkness. I glanced at the digital clock resting on the corner of my mahogany desk. It read exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. Outside the heavy window blinds, the affluent suburban neighborhood was cloaked in total silence and absolute darkness. I picked up my phone. I bypassed my usual list of friends and family contacts and scrolled straight to a number I kept strictly for extreme corporate emergencies. Valerie was not a friendly, collaborative family law practitioner who mediated amicable splits. Valerie was a ruthless, terrifyingly efficient corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers, aggressive asset recovery, and completely dismantling fraudulent entities. She was a shark in a tailored suit, and I needed her teeth. I tapped her name. The line rang exactly twice before the connection clicked open. Her voice was completely sharp, entirely awake, and strictly professional, entirely ignoring the absurd early morning hour. She did not ask how I was doing, she simply waited for my directive. I gripped the phone tightly, my voice dropping to a low, steady whisper that carried the absolute weight of an execution order. Valerie, I want to legally sever every financial tie, empty the joint accounts he has been draining, and evict his ex-wife. How fast can we move? Valerie's response on the phone was exactly what I needed to hear. Cold, precise, and completely devoid of unnecessary sympathy. She did not waste time offering me useless condolences or asking how my heart felt. She simply listened to my rapid-fire summary of the financial crimes, the forged trust documents, and the staggering scale of the theft. When I finished, she gave me a clear tactical directive. She told me we could have everything locked down, legally severed, and ready to detonate in exactly 5 days. But for those 5 days, I had to execute the hardest assignment of my entire life. I had to play the fool. I had to let him believe he was still the king of the castle. I had to keep the financial arteries wide open so he would not suspect a single thing, while Valerie built a legal cage he could never escape. The transition required an absolute suppression of my own ego. But I am a professional. I know how to compartmentalize. Over the next 5 days, I became the ultimate defeated submissive wife. Jamal ate it up with a spoon. He honestly believed his aggressive posturing and alpha male routine at the Sunday dinner had finally broken my spirit. He thought I was just a tired, overworked corporate drone who had finally accepted her place beneath him. I woke up at dawn to iron his custom suits for his fake job. I stood in our pristine kitchen and brewed his premium imported coffee. I listened to him complain endlessly about the fictional stress of managing his imaginary consulting firm. I nodded with wide, sympathetic eyes while mentally cataloging every single item in the house that I was about to liquidate. The sheer arrogance of the man was breathtaking. He became so emboldened by my sudden quiet compliance that he stopped trying to hide his movements. He walked into the kitchen on day 3, loudly discussing the final itinerary for his upcoming Caribbean cruise. It was a 7-day luxury voyage he had booked for himself, his mother Brenda, his sister Tasha, and her freeloading husband Connor. I was supposedly staying behind to work on a massive corporate audit because, as he put it, someone had to keep the lights on while he took a much-needed mental health break. He actually had the nerve to stand in my kitchen, drinking the coffee I made him, and detail the excursions he had just booked on my platinum corporate card. swimming with stingrays, private beach cabanas, a chartered helicopter tour over the islands. I smiled, poured him another cup, and told him he deserved the rest. Day 4 brought a completely new level of psychological torture. I was sitting at my expensive quartz kitchen island reviewing a client ledger when Jamal walked through the front door holding the hand of Aliyah, his 7-year-old daughter, with Chloe. I actually liked Aliyah. She was a sweet, bright, innocent child who had absolutely no idea her parents were parasitic frauds. I greeted her with a warm hug and offered her a snack. Jamal sat her down on one of the high velvet bar stools, puffing out his chest with the manufactured pride of a wealthy provider. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, black velvet box. He popped it open right in front of me. Resting on the silk cushion was a dazzling custom-made diamond pendant necklace. It was a beautiful piece glittering sharply under the recessed kitchen lighting. Aliyah gasped, her little hands reaching up to touch her face. "This is for your birthday," Princess Jamal said smoothly, his voice dripping with paternal affection from Daddy and Mommy. Mommy, meaning Chloe. My stomach turned to absolute ice, but my face remained a perfect serene mask. I did not need to guess where that necklace came from. I did not need to wonder how a man with zero income managed to purchase custom jewelry. Just 4 hours earlier, while I was sitting at my desk pretending to review tax codes, I had received a high-priority fraud alert text from American Express. It was a notification for a pending charge of exactly $2,000 at a high-end boutique jeweler downtown. I had immediately logged into the portal and manually approved the charge myself, knowing Valerie needed him to keep spending normally so he would not feel the trap closing around him. He was standing in the center of my house, handing his daughter a diamond that I paid for, and giving all the credit to the woman who was secretly living in a luxury townhouse funded by my grandfather's blind trust. The absolute audacity was almost cinematic. I walked over to the island, poured Aliyah a glass of fresh juice, and looked directly at the sparkling stones. "It is absolutely beautiful, sweetie," I said, my voice radiating genuine warmth. "Your dad has excellent taste." Jamal beamed at me, completely missing the razor-sharp calculated edge beneath my words. He truly believed he had won. He believed he had successfully subjugated a brilliant woman and turned her into a silent ATM for his entire extended family. Day 5 arrived with the heavy electric anticipation of a looming storm. The morning of the execution. Jamal came downstairs dressed in his sharpest navy blue suit, splashing on the expensive designer cologne I had bought him for our anniversary. He adjusted his silk tie in the hallway mirror, checking his reflection like a man who owned the entire world. He grabbed his heavy leather briefcase, which I now knew contained absolutely nothing of value. "I have back-to-back business meetings all day today," he announced, checking his luxury watch. "Might be late. Do not wait up for dinner." I knew exactly where his business meetings were taking place. He was heading straight to Chloe's luxury townhouse to pack his bags and prepare for their tropical getaway. He walked over to where I was standing by the front door, leaned down, and pressed a patronizing, lingering kiss to my forehead. "You are a good woman for understanding, Maya," he whispered smoothly, his hand resting heavily on my shoulder. "I know I work a lot, but I do it all for us." I looked up into his eyes, keeping my expression perfectly soft and compliant. "I know you do, Jamal. Have a great day." He smiled, his charming $1,000,000 smile, turned on his heel, and walked out the door. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind him. I stood perfectly still, waiting until I heard the engine of his leased luxury sedan start up and back out of the driveway. As the sound of his car faded down the street, the perfect submissive wife instantly vanished into thin air. I reached out and engaged the deadbolt with a heavy, satisfying thud. I walked straight into my home office, locked the door behind me, and sat down at my desk. I reached into my secure lower drawer and pulled out a massive, heavy stack of legally binding documents Valerie had just couriered over. The ink was fresh, the trap was primed. The stack of legal documents Valerie had couriered over was heavy bound in thick blue folders and represented the absolute meticulous dismantling of my marriage. I spread them out across the smooth mahogany surface of my desk. Every single page was marked with precise yellow tabs, indicating exactly where my signature was required. Valerie had not wasted a single minute. While Jamal was busy driving across the city to play house with his ex-wife in a property he had fraudulently secured with my bloodline, I was quietly signing away his entire perceived reality. I started with the most substantial asset, our marital home. For years, Jamal had strutted around this 5,000 square foot property, acting like a titan of real estate. He loved hosting his broke friends for expensive bourbon and imported cigars on the back patio, loudly lecturing them about property equity market fluctuations and the importance of masculine property ownership. He genuinely believed that because his name was on the marriage certificate, he was automatically entitled to half the value of the estate. He was incredibly wrong. When we purchased the house, I had utilized a specific holding company nested deeply under my private LLC to execute the transaction. I had told Jamal it was simply a standard tax optimization strategy, a boring accounting maneuver that he immediately lost interest in. In reality, it was an ironclad legal barrier. The deed had never been in his name. It had never even been in my personal name. Valerie had prepared the transfer paperwork to formally shift the property title out of the vulnerable holding company and directly into an impenetrable, irrevocable trust that Jamal could not even legally perceive, let alone contest. I signed the transfer deeds with a steady, forceful hand. If he thought he could drag out a divorce by demanding a forced sale of the house he was about to discover, he possessed the exact same legal squatter rights as a stray cat on my front porch. I set the property deeds aside and turned my attention to my secondary monitor. It was time to drain the swamp. I logged into the portal for our primary joint checking and savings accounts. This was the massive financial reservoir where my corporate consulting fees commingled with what I had always assumed was his business revenue. This was the very pool he had been systematically siphoning from to fund Brenda's church tithes, Tasha's luxury vacations, and Chloe's high-end lifestyle. Valerie had given me extreme explicit legal parameters for this exact maneuver. I was legally entitled to reclaim every single dollar that originated from my personal direct deposits prior to serving him with divorce papers. Since my direct deposits accounted for exactly 100% of the incoming revenue for the past 36 months, the math was wonderfully simple. I initiated a priority wire transfer routing the massive six-figure balance through a secure third-party escrow account Valerie had established, which would then bounce the funds directly into my private offshore trust. I sat back and watched the loading wheel spin. I watched the numbers on the screen plummet in real time as the wire processed. I did not zero the account out completely. A completely empty account would trigger an automated fraud alert from the bank's security algorithm, sending an immediate text notification to Jamal's phone and ruining the element of surprise. Instead, I calculated the exact amount of the single meager deposit he had made from a freelance gig 3.5 years ago. I subtracted the thousands of dollars he had stolen for his family over the last month, subtracted the processing fees for the wire transfer, and left him exactly what he had actually contributed to our household economy. The screen refreshed. The transaction was complete. The available balance glowed in bright blue text, $4.32. The cash was secured. Next came the credit lines. I picked up my phone and dialed the executive concierge line for my corporate black card. A polite representative answered almost immediately. I identified myself using my security pins and informed the representative that I was executing an immediate separation of accounts. I ordered them to instantly and permanently revoke the authorized user status for my husband. I am also calling to report highly suspicious activity on the secondary card, I stated, my voice calm and perfectly authoritative. I need to flag a series of specific recent transactions for immediate fraud review and initiate chargebacks. I read off the exact vendor identification numbers and authorization codes: the $2,000 diamond pendant from the downtown jeweler, the St. Bart's private catamaran charter, the upcoming Aspen ski chalet rental. I explicitly informed the fraud department that the authorized user had fraudulently utilized the corporate credit line for non-approved personal expenditures outside the scope of our business agreement without the primary cardholder's knowledge or consent. The representative immediately locked the physical cards and initiated aggressive chargeback protocols on the pending transactions. Jamal was currently driving around Atlanta with pieces of plastic in his custom leather wallet that possessed the exact purchasing power of a discarded gum wrapper. For the next 48 hours, I was an absolute ghost, moving silently through the machine of his life. I smiled warmly over dinner. I washed and folded his expensive golf shirts. I listened with rapt, practiced attention to his completely fabricated stories about stressful client acquisitions. I watched him strut around my house, completely oblivious to the fact that the floorboards beneath his feet no longer belonged to him. His bank account could not cover the cost of a value meal, and his credit cards were radioactive. The morning of the cruise finally arrived. The air inside the house was thick with frantic, buzzing anticipation. Jamal was practically vibrating with excitement, double-checking his designer luggage and admiring his reflection in the hallway mirror. He was dressed in crisp white linen trousers and a tailored polo, ready to play the wealthy patriarch sailing the Caribbean Sea. At exactly 8 in the morning, the doorbell rang sharply. I opened the heavy front door to find Brenda and Tasha standing on my porch. They were armed with oversized designer sun hats, massive canvas beach totes, and matching expressions of arrogant entitlement. They barged past me without waiting for a greeting, their loud voices echoing obnoxiously through my quiet foyer. They had supposedly come to help Jamal pack his final carry-on bag before the luxury car service arrived to take them to the port. Brenda strolled directly into my living room, her eyes raking critically over the space. She looked at my custom-imported silk window treatments, then looked at the expensive modern art hanging above the fireplace. She let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, intentionally projecting her voice so it would carry perfectly into the kitchen where I was standing near the island. Chloe always had much better taste in drapery, Brenda announced to the room, shaking her head, as if my decor physically offended her. Maybe when you guys get back from the trip, Jamal can have her come over and redecorate this place. It feels so cold in here. I felt the familiar hot spark of pure rage flare in my chest, but I kept my face entirely placid. I did not flinch. I did not glare. I walked over to the marble island, picked up Jamal's heavy leather passport holder containing his travel documents, and walked back out into the foyer. I handed the passport directly to Jamal, who was grinning foolishly at his mother's insult. I turned my head and offered Brenda a wide, perfectly serene, brilliantly bright smile. "Oh," I said, my voice sweet and light as spun sugar. "I am sure there will be a lot of redecorating happening very soon." The heavy oak door of my home office clicked shut, sealing me inside my sanctuary. For the past 5 hours, I had operated with the cold mechanical efficiency of an executioner. Valerie had been flawless. The property deeds were irrevocably transferred. The banking algorithms had processed the wire transfers. The credit issuers had frozen the accounts and initiated the fraud investigations. The locks on the house had been changed by a premium emergency locksmith who asked 0 questions and accepted cash. My grandfather's legacy was entirely secure, walled off behind a fortress of impenetrable legal injunctions. I walked out of my office and moved into the pristine sunlit kitchen. The house was utterly silent, save for the low, steady hum of the expensive refrigerator. The air felt remarkably light. The suffocating heavy pressure I had carried in my chest for the last 3 years had completely vanished, replaced by a crystalline, predatory calm. I walked over to the built-in wine cooler, opened the glass door, and selected a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. It was an exceptionally rare, wildly expensive bottle Jamal had purchased last month, using my money to celebrate what he claimed was a successful quarter at his fictional consulting firm. He had instructed me not to open it until he gave the word. I peeled the foil away, drove the corkscrew in, and pulled the cork with a soft, satisfying pop. I poured a generous measure into a heavy crystal glass, watching the dark ruby liquid swirl against the light. I set the bottle on the marble island, picked up my phone, and waited. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, the screen illuminated. A text message notification chimed, vibrating sharply against the cool stone surface of the counter. It was from Jamal. I unlocked the screen. He had sent an image file followed by a block of text. I tapped the image. The high-resolution photo loaded, displaying a picture-perfect manufactured family portrait taken in front of a sprawling multi-story luxury cruise liner at the Miami Port Terminal. Jamal was standing in the center wearing his crisp linen resort wear, beaming with absolute arrogance. On his left stood his mother Brenda, clutching an oversized designer tote bag, looking thoroughly pleased with her unearned VIP status. Next to her was Tasha and Connor, both holding tropical cocktails, entirely unbothered by their massive mountain of debt. And standing directly on Jamal's right, holding little Aaliyah's hand, was Chloe. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a smug, victorious smirk, leaning her shoulder intimately against my husband's chest. Beneath the photograph was Jamal's message. "Hey babe, boarding soon. I know we talked about this being a solo trip to decompress, but Chloe surprised us at the terminal. Princess really needs both her parents around for these core memories, you know how it is. You are a good woman for understanding and holding down the fort. Love you. Talk in a week." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the message washed over me. He had not just brought his ex-wife on a luxury vacation funded entirely by my stolen money. He was openly flaunting it, confident that he had broken my spirit so thoroughly that I would simply swallow the disrespect, sit quietly in my empty house, and pay the credit card bill when he returned. He genuinely believed I was too docile, too thoroughly subjugated by his family's psychological warfare to ever push back. He thought he was untouchable. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the Cabernet. The wine was rich, complex, and tasted like absolute victory. I set the crystal glass down on the marble counter. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I did not type a frantic, emotional paragraph. I did not ask him how he could do this to me. I did not demand an explanation. I delivered the execution order. I typed out the response with steady, perfectly measured keystrokes. "I completely agree. That's why you have plenty of time to be a full-time father now." I canceled the black card. The joint account is closed. Oh, and my LLC just served Chloe her 24-hour eviction notice for the townhouse you fraudulently leased. Have a great cruise. Your bags are on the porch. I read the message once to ensure the punctuation was flawless. I tapped the small blue arrow. Send. A tiny swoosh sounded in the quiet kitchen. The message bubble appeared on the screen. Below it, the tiny gray text materialized. Delivered. I picked up my glass of wine, leaned back against the cool edge of the refrigerator, and watched the screen. 10 seconds passed, 20 seconds. Then the gray text shifted. Read. I closed my eyes, savoring the profound, beautiful silence of my kitchen. I imagined the exact sequence of events unfolding 300 miles away at the cruise terminal. I visualized Jamal standing in the tropical heat, his smug million-dollar smile slowly melting off his face as his brain struggled to comprehend the words on the screen. I imagined the hot, spiking wave of adrenaline hitting his bloodstream. I knew exactly what he was doing in that very second. He was frantically minimizing the text message interface. He was opening his mobile banking application. He was staring at the bold, undeniable balance of $4.32. He was opening his American Express app. He was seeing the bright red banner screaming that his authorized user privileges had been permanently revoked. I took another slow sip of wine. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Somewhere in that terminal, Chloe's phone was ringing. The leasing management company did not send polite warning emails for major corporate fraud. They sent armed constables with formal eviction notices. I imagined Chloe answering the call, her arrogant smirk vanishing as the property manager informed her that the financial guarantor on her lease had been invalidated. Her locks were being changed by nightfall, and her belongings would be unceremoniously dumped on the curb if she did not vacate the premises immediately. 3 minutes. 4 minutes. The initial shock was wearing off. The reality of their total catastrophic financial ruin was setting in. The cruise tickets were booked on my card. The boarding passes required a final authorization swipe at the gate. A swipe that would immediately trigger a hard decline and a fraud alert. They were standing on the concrete pier with their designer luggage completely stranded, utterly broke, and entirely exposed. At exactly 5 minutes and 12 seconds, the silence in my kitchen shattered. My phone erupted, buzzing violently across the marble island. The screen flashed bright white. Incoming call, Jamal. I did not move. I stood perfectly still, watching the phone vibrate, listening to the desperate, jarring ringtone echo off the high ceilings. The call rang through to the end, switching over to voicemail. 2 seconds later, the phone lit up again. Incoming call, Jamal. I let it ring. He called 6 times in rapid succession. I did not touch the screen. The machine gun rhythm of his incoming calls was the sweetest music I had ever heard. He was panic dialing. The man who had walked out of my house that morning believing he was a titan of industry was currently sweating through his linen suit, frantically stabbing at his phone screen like a desperate child. After his 7th attempt went to voicemail, a new name flashed on the screen. Incoming call, Chloe. I let out a soft laugh. The queen of the luxury townhouse was calling the woman she had spent years actively mocking. I let it ring. Chloe called 3 times. When she finally gave up, the screen immediately lit up with a third name. Incoming call, Brenda, the platinum pillar of the megachurch. The woman who took $36,000 of my money to buy religious clout was demanding an audience. I let it go straight to voicemail. The phone finally went dark. The assault of incoming calls temporarily paused. I reached out, unlocked the screen, and navigated directly to my voicemail inbox. The visual transcriptions were already loading, but I wanted to hear the audio. I wanted to hear the exact tone of their empire burning to the ground. I tapped play on Jamal's first message. The audio crackled out of the speaker. Maya, what the hell is this? Stop playing games. I am standing at the boarding terminal and the concierge is telling me the card is locked. This is not funny. Unfreeze the account right now. Chloe is standing right here and you are embarrassing me. Call the bank and fix this immediately. I am not playing with you. His voice was strained, thick with false bravado and rising panic. He was still trying to maintain his alpha posture, still trying to issue commands, but the terror bleeding through his tone was unmistakable. I deleted the message and tapped the second voicemail. Maya, pick up the phone. Pick up the phone right now. The Port Authority will not let us board. They are saying the payment was flagged for fraud and reversed. I cannot access the checking account. The app says it is empty. What did you do? Maya, please answer the phone. We are standing outside with all our luggage. Answer me. The bravado was completely gone. He was breathless, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. He had finally realized I was not a foolish, submissive wife. I was the architect of his total destruction. I deleted the message and moved to Chloe's voicemail. You psychotic witch! Chloe's voice screamed through the speaker so loud and shrill the audio distorted. The property manager just called me. They have police at my door. You cannot do this to me. You cannot kick me out of my house. Jamal promised me this place. You are a bitter, jealous, barren freak, and I am going to sue you for everything you have. Call them off. Call them off right now. I smiled, thoroughly enjoying the sound of her unhinged fury. She had spent years flaunting a lifestyle she could not afford, weaponizing her fertility to make me feel small. Now she was a homeless fraud screaming into a void. I deleted her message and tapped the final recording. It was Brenda. Maya. Brenda's voice was tight, trembling with suppressed rage and a heavy dose of manufactured religious authority. This behavior is entirely unacceptable. You are acting like a hysterical, vindictive woman. Jamal is under a tremendous amount of stress providing for this family, and you are ruining our vacation. I am commanding you to unfreeze those accounts immediately and restore order to this household. If you do not fix this right now, God will punish you for your wicked, selfish heart. I set the phone down on the counter. The voicemails were over. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had completely pulverized them. I picked up my crystal glass, took a final deep sip of the Cabernet, and looked out the kitchen window at my beautiful, fully secured, perfectly quiet house. I was not wicked. I was not selfish. I was simply a forensic accountant who had finally decided to balance the ledger. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. But it was a fragile temporary thing. I had barely set my empty crystal wine glass into the stainless steel sink when the phone resting on the marble island began its violent, rhythmic vibration all over again. The first wave of voicemails had been the sound of initial chaotic shock. This new incoming barrage, however, was the sound of inescapable, terrifying reality crashing down upon them in a very public space. They had moved from the curbside drop-off into the actual boarding terminal. I picked up the device. The screen was a chaotic cascade of missed call notifications, all originating from Jamal. I bypassed the call screen, navigating directly to my visual voicemail inbox. A new 3-minute recording was sitting at the top of the queue. I tapped the play icon, leaning my hips against the cool edge of the counter to listen to the live broadcast of my husband's total destruction. The audio began with a cacophony of background noise. I could clearly hear the echoing, cavernous acoustics of the Port of Miami terminal. The muffled, cheerful voice of an automated PA announcer was echoing in the distance, reminding premium guests to have their travel documents ready. But right over the microphone, Jamal's breathing was heavy, ragged, and frantic. "Maya, pick up the goddamn phone," he hissed, his voice dropping into a harsh, panicked whisper. "I'm standing at the platinum boarding desk. The ticketing agent just ran the card for the mandatory port taxes and the prepaid cabin gratuities. It declined. It hard declined, Maya. They swiped it 3 times and the system is telling them to confiscate the physical card." I could hear the absolute humiliation choking his vocal cords. Jamal was a man who lived and died by public perception. He demanded to be seen as a wealthy, providing patriarch, especially in front of Chloe and his mother. To have his premium metal credit card declined in front of a smiling cruise terminal employee was his own personal nightmare. "I told them it was a bank security glitch," Jamal continued, his breathing accelerating into a genuine panic attack. "I told them I just needed to call my financial manager to authorize the international travel flags, but I can't even log into the app, Maya. My password is locked. You have to fix this. The agent is looking at me like I'm a criminal. We are holding up the entire VIP line. You need to transfer funds right now." Suddenly, the audio shifted. The phone was clearly yanked away from Jamal's mouth, and a new shrill voice pierced the speaker. It was Chloe, and the manufactured smug superiority she had carried all morning had completely evaporated into sheer hysteria. "Jamal, are you listening to me?" Chloe shrieked, completely ignoring the public setting. "Forget the stupid cruise, my neighbor just sent me a photograph. She just texted me a picture of my front door. There is a neon green paper taped directly over the peephole. It's a 24-hour eviction notice, Jamal. It has my name on it. It has a formal court seal." "Chloe, keep your voice down. People are staring at us," Jamal pleaded in the background, his tone begging for compliance. "I don't care who is staring," she screamed back, the pitch of her voice cracking the audio feed. "The property management company told my neighbor that the financial guarantor invalidated the lease. The locks are being changed tomorrow morning. Where am I supposed to go, Jamal? Where are Aaliyah and I supposed to live? You told me you owned that townhouse. You told me it was under your business. You lied to me." "I didn't lie. It's just a misunderstanding with Maya's holding company. Just let me call her." The voicemail abruptly cut off, terminating in a sharp click. Jamal had hung up, likely to prevent Chloe from causing a full-blown security incident at the ticketing counter. I let out a slow, deeply satisfied breath. The townhouse had been the ultimate insult. When Jamal had first set Chloe up in that luxury rental, he had used a shell company heavily subsidized by my personal wealth to act as the financial guarantor, ensuring she bypassed the stringent credit checks. He had played the benevolent provider, securing a safe upscale environment for his daughter and his ex-wife on my dime. Valerie, my attorney, had utterly destroyed that arrangement with a single legally binding cessation of financial responsibility. Without my flawless credit profile backing the lease, Chloe was nothing more than an unauthorized squatter with zero verifiable income. Before I could even process the sheer poetry of Chloe's eviction, my phone screen illuminated with a new notification. It wasn't a phone call, it was a text message. The name at the top of the banner read Tasha. I swiped open the message thread. My sister-in-law, a woman who had never worked a consecutive 40-hour week in her entire adult life, had sent a block of text entirely in capital letters riddled with frantic typos. Maya. WTF is going on with the bank account? Connor and I are sitting in the finance manager's office at the Mercedes dealership. We are trying to put down the deposit on the new G-Wagon, and the family card just declined. The finance guy is looking at us like we are trash. Jamal said you handle all the fraud texts from Amex. Approve the charge right now. This is so embarrassing. Fix it. I stared at the glowing letters on my screen, marveling at the boundless parasitic audacity of Jamal's family. Connor and Tasha were sitting in a luxury car dealership, casually attempting to swipe a card tied directly to my corporate earnings to fund a six-figure vehicle lease. Jamal had actually given them a physical copy of my secondary business expense card, branding it to them as a family emergency account. In their twisted, entitled minds, an upgrade to a brand new Mercedes SUV constituted a family emergency. I did not reply. I did not explain myself. I simply tapped the information icon at the top of the message thread, scrolled to the bottom of the screen, and pressed the bright red button that read, "Block this caller." The digital severance was instantaneous. Connor and Tasha could sit in that leather-chaired finance office until the dealership closed, waiting for a bank authorization that would never ever arrive. They were about to experience the harsh, unforgiving reality of living strictly within their own financial means. I placed the phone flat on the marble counter and crossed my arms. The final act of this tragedy was approaching. Exactly 5 agonizing minutes later, the screen lit up one last time. Incoming call, Jamal. I watched the phone vibrate slowly, inching its way across the smooth stone surface. He was relentless. He was a drowning man, frantically clawing at the surface of the water, desperate for a life preserver that simply did not exist. I let it ring. The call routed to voicemail. Within seconds, the transcription software processed the audio, but once again, I needed to hear the actual recording. I tapped play. The man speaking into the receiver no longer sounded like my husband. The deep, authoritative baritone he had cultivated to intimidate boardrooms and subjugate me at Sunday dinners was completely gone. It was replaced by the high-pitched, ragged, gasping sounds of a man experiencing a total psychological collapse. Jamal was weeping. It was not a dignified, quiet cry. It was a messy, humiliating, chest-heaving sob. Maya, please." He choked out, his voice thick with tears and mucus. "Please, I am begging you. This is a mistake. Please pick up the phone. I am so sorry. Whatever I did, I am so sorry. We are standing right at the counter. Everyone is watching us. My mother is having a panic attack." In the background, the audio was sheer, unadulterated chaos. I could hear little Aaliyah crying loudly, clearly terrified by the sudden explosive tension between the adults she trusted. For a fleeting second, a microscopic sliver of sympathy for the child brushed against my conscience. But I immediately dismissed it. Aaliyah was innocent, but she was not my responsibility. Her father was a fraud, her mother was a parasite, and they were the ones traumatizing her in a public terminal, not me. "Sir, you need to step away from the ticketing desk immediately," a stern, unfamiliar voice commanded in the background of the recording. "You are blocking the boarding queue. Take your family and your luggage to the side, or I will have port security escort you off the premises." "I have the money. I swear I have the money. Just give me 5 minutes to reach my wife." Jamal sobbed at the official before pulling the phone back to his mouth. "Maya, please. Chloe is crying. Aaliyah is embarrassed. They are threatening to call security on us. They are going to throw us out into the street. Please, baby, I need you. I need you to fix this." The voicemail ended. I stood in the profound silence of my kitchen, the echoes of his weeping fading into the quiet luxury of my home. He had asked me to fix it. He still believed, even in the absolute depths of his public humiliation, that I was put on this earth to clean up his messes, to fund his delusions, and to protect his fragile ego. He thought a few desperate tears would override years of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. I picked up the phone. My fingers were perfectly steady. I opened our text message thread, the same thread where he had smugly informed me that his ex-wife was joining him on a vacation I paid for. I tapped the keyboard, my eyes locked onto the bright screen, and typed my final communication to the man I had married. Failure doesn't belong in my house, Jamal. Try Uber. I hit send. The blue bubble rocketed to the top of the screen. I did not wait to see the delivery receipt. I did not wait to see if the little gray text shifted to read. I pressed my thumb against the right side of the device, holding down the power button until the screen flashed with the shutdown prompt. I slid the digital toggle across the glass. The screen went completely beautifully black. 300 miles away, the tropical fantasy evaporated into a blistering, humid nightmare. Jamal stood on the scorching concrete of the Miami port terminal, his crisp linen suit rapidly deteriorating into a wrinkled, sweat-soaked rag. The luxury car service he had booked for the return trip to the airport required an active credit card on file to dispatch a driver. Naturally, that card had been flagged for massive corporate fraud and permanently canceled. He was forced to flag down a battered, sun-bleached taxi that smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap pine air freshener. It was a profoundly humiliating spectacle. He and Chloe had to physically shove their massive, gleaming Louis Vuitton steamer trunks into the cramped trunk of the ancient sedan, securing the trunk lid with a frayed bungee cord the impatient driver provided. Chloe was absolutely livid. Her face was flushed dark red, her oversized designer sunglasses pushed up into her messy hair as she hissed venomous insults at Jamal from the back seat. She spent the entire agonizing, unair-conditioned ride to the airport screaming about the eviction notice taped to her front door. She was entirely indifferent to little Aaliyah, who sat wedged between them quietly crying from the stress of the sudden screaming match. Chloe demanded to know how Jamal could possibly allow her to face the indignity of a public eviction. She demanded to know where the money was. She demanded to know why he was suddenly treating her like a peasant. Jamal had absolutely no answers. His entire reality had been unplugged from the wall. The flight back to Atlanta was a masterclass in silent, suffocating hostility. When they finally landed, there was no black car waiting at the curb. They were forced to take another cheap cab directly to Brenda's cramped, dated house in the suburbs. There was nowhere else to go. Jamal walked through his mother's front door, dragging his heavy bags, a completely broken, emasculated fraud, returning to the very environment he had spent years pretending he had outgrown. By the next morning, the initial shock had fully metabolized into righteous, aggressive fury. Jamal had spent the entire night pacing Brenda's worn living room carpet, spinning a desperate, elaborate narrative to save face. He convinced his mother, his sister Tasha, and her husband Connor that I was simply having an emotional breakdown. He assured them this was nothing more than a hysterical tantrum from an overworked wife, a temporary glitch in his otherwise perfect control over me. He insisted that he just needed to march over there, assert his dominance as the head of the household, and put me back in my proper place. He needed them to believe he was still the undisputed king. They eagerly swallowed the lie because they desperately needed their personal ATM turned back on. At 8 in the morning, the four of them piled into Connor's rattling sedan. They were a mobilized strike force of pure entitlement. During the drive across the city to my neighborhood, they whipped themselves into a toxic frenzy. Brenda loudly quoted scripture from the passenger seat, lecturing the car about wifely submission and the evils of a rebellious, ungrateful spirit. Tasha complained bitterly from the back, whining about the sheer, unforgivable embarrassment of having her card declined in the finance office of the Mercedes dealership, while the salesman looked at her like a criminal. Jamal sat in the back next to her, his jaw clenched tight, promising them all that he would have the bank accounts unfrozen and the money flowing before lunch. They pulled onto my wide, manicured street, fully expecting to barge right through my unlocked front door, raise their voices, and bully the quiet, submissive woman into total compliance. They believed volume and intimidation would solve their financial ruin. Their entire battle plan disintegrated the exact second Connor's sedan approached my property line. The heavy wrought iron driveway gates, which were typically left wide open to welcome visitors, were securely locked shut. Standing directly in front of the reinforced steel bars were two massive, impeccably dressed private security contractors. They wore dark, tailored suits, dark sunglasses, and expressions of absolute, unyielding authority. Connor slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing harshly against the pavement as the car jerked to a halt right before the curb. The four of them spilled out of the vehicle, staring at the imposing black gate in total bewilderment. Jamal stormed up to the iron bars, puffing his chest out to its maximum capacity. He demanded the guards step aside. He ordered them to open the gate for the rightful owner of the house. The guards did not flinch. They did not shift their weight. They did not even speak. They simply crossed their arms and stared straight through him, treating him like a complete stranger, trespassing on a restricted corporate compound. Jamal gripped the iron bars, shaking them forcefully, his voice rising in sudden panic, as he realized the physical barrier separating him from my wealth was entirely real and completely unmovable. The heavy mahogany front door of the house swung open. I stepped out onto the wide wrap-around porch. I was not wearing my usual modest conservative work attire. I wore a sharp, tailored crimson power suit, my hair perfectly styled, my posture radiating absolute untouchable authority. Beside me walked Valerie. My attorney looked exactly like a great white shark sensing blood in the water. She carried a sleek leather briefcase and wore a terrifying predatory smile that promised absolute ruin. Seeing me standing on the porch of the house he thought he owned, looking down at him from behind a locked gate, completely broke what remained of Jamal's composure. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Brenda, however, possessed no such restraint. She pushed her way past her son to the front of the bars, gripping the black iron with both hands. Her face twisted into a mask of pure self-righteous fury. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing harshly down the quiet, wealthy street. She shouted about my Christian duty. She screamed about my wicked, selfish heart. She demanded to know how I dared to disrespect the man of the house, ordering me to open the gates instantly and beg for my husband's forgiveness before God struck me down for my insolence. She yelled that a wife's place was to support her husband, not to humiliate him in front of his family. I did not raise my voice. I did not interrupt her unhinged, frantic sermon. I simply stood on the top step and let her scream until her lungs burned and her voice grew hoarse. I reached over to the small wrought iron table resting on the porch, picked up a heavy stack of thick manila folders, and walked purposefully down the long driveway toward the gate. I closed the distance down the long paved driveway with deliberate, measured steps. My heels clicked in a steady, rhythmic cadence against the stone, a stark contrast to the frantic, unhinged screaming coming from the other side of the gate. Brenda's shrieks grew louder, then abruptly faltered into an uncertain, breathless silence as I reached the barrier. My absolute lack of emotion deeply unsettled her. I did not yell back. I did not cry. I did not offer a single word of defense against her religious tirade. I simply slid the first heavy manila folder through the gap in the iron bars, pressing it directly into Jamal's chest. He reflexively grabbed the thick envelope, looking down at the stark, brutal reality of his life, reduced to paper. Several of my wealthy neighbors had stepped out onto their manicured lawns, holding their morning coffees, openly watching the spectacle unfold. I wanted them to watch. I wanted Jamal to feel the burning, inescapable shame of his exposure under the bright morning sun. "Open it," I commanded, my voice carrying clearly through the crisp air. Jamal hesitated, his jaw working furiously. When he did not move, I narrated the contents for the entire street to hear. "That folder contains the forensic accounting of your entire existence over the last 36 months, Jamal. It contains the official tax returns for your imaginary consulting firm, which generated exactly $0 in revenue last year. It contains the bankruptcy filings my lawyer has already drafted on your behalf, because without my direct deposits, you are entirely insolvent. You do not own this house. You do not own the cars you drive. You do not even own the designer watch currently sitting on your wrist. You are a financial parasite who mistook my silence for stupidity." Jamal opened his mouth, trying to summon that deep, dominant baritone he loved to use to keep me in line, but only a pathetic, raspy stutter emerged. Brenda stared at him, her eyes wide with shock, waiting for her golden son to defend himself, to put me in my proper place. But he had nothing to say. He just stared at the legal documents proving he was completely destitute. I did not give them a moment to breathe. I turned my attention to Connor. He was puffing out his chest, stepping forward aggressively, as if he was going to intimidate me into opening the gate by sheer physical presence. He crossed his thick arms, trying to look like the protective, masculine husband, defending his family's honor against an out-of-control woman. I slid the second manila folder through the iron bars. I held it out, waiting in perfect silence until Connor snatched it from my hand. He ripped the seal open, clearly expecting legal threats or eviction notices. Instead, he found highly detailed bank statements, highlighted transfer ledgers, and pages of printed text message transcripts. I watched his face transition from aggressive bravado to utter humiliating confusion. "You love driving that leased Mercedes, do you not, Connor?" I asked, keeping my tone conversationally light and pleasant. "You love bragging at family dinners about how well your investments are doing and how you provide for your wife. You should look at page 3. Those are the text messages your wife sent to my husband. Tasha has been begging Jamal to siphon cash out of my corporate accounts for 2 years just to keep your lights on. She begged him to pay your car notes. She pleaded with him to cover the deposits on your luxury vacations because your credit score is in the gutter and you cannot secure a standard loan." Connor stopped breathing. His eyes darted rapidly across the printed pages. "You are not a self-made man, Connor," I stated, my voice echoing off the brick facade of my home. "You are a charity case funded entirely by the woman you are currently standing outside of trying to intimidate. Your entire life is subsidized by my paycheck." Connor's face turned violently red, a deep blotchy crimson that spread all the way down his neck and flushed his ears. He stared at the printed text messages, where his own wife called him a financial failure who could not provide, pleading with her brother for secretly wired cash to maintain their illusion of wealth. Connor whipped his head around, glaring at Tasha with absolute, unadulterated disgust. Tasha shrank back, her hands flying up in a desperate defensive gesture. She tried to deny it, stammering loudly that I had fabricated the documents to tear their marriage apart, but the authorization codes, the dates, and the bank transfer receipts were indisputable. Connor turned his fury on Jamal, shoving his shoulder hard. He demanded to know why Jamal had lied to him, why they had treated him like a fool while spending my money behind his back to make him look pathetic. Jamal shoved him back, screaming that Connor was ungrateful and owed him his entire lifestyle. Brenda started shrieking at Connor to stop touching her son, violently swinging her designer purse at Connor's shoulder. Tasha began sobbing hysterically, begging Connor to calm down. The great impenetrable family wall had completely disintegrated. The united front they had used to terrorize me for years shattered into a million jagged pieces. They were a pack of rabid animals, turning on each other right in the middle of the street, screaming about money lies and shattered egos, while the neighbors watched in fascinated horror. Amidst the chaotic screaming, Chloe pushed her way to the front of the gate. She was dragging little Aaliyah by the hand. The child looked absolutely terrified, clinging tightly to her mother's leg, while the adults around her screamed and shoved one another. Chloe had always relied on weaponizing this child. It was her ultimate trump card. She gripped the black iron bars, her knuckles turning white, and tried to summon a mask of weeping maternal desperation. She screamed that I was a monster. She yelled over the sounds of Connor and Jamal fighting that I was punishing an innocent 7-year-old girl. She called me a cold, barren witch, making a child homeless just out of bitter spite. She demanded I open the gates, show some basic human decency, and transfer the townhouse deed back to Jamal so her daughter would have a safe roof over her head. She thrust Aaliyah forward, trying to force me to look at the crying child to break my resolve. I did not even have to speak. Valerie stepped up right beside me. My lawyer adjusted her designer glasses, looking down at Chloe with a chilling, perfectly calculated smile. She leaned close to the iron bars, radiating the kind of absolute corporate ruthlessness that money could buy. "Actually," Valerie said, her voice slicing through the noise with razor-sharp precision, "the police are at the townhouse right now enforcing the fraud eviction. The property manager is currently unbolting your front door." If you do not want your designer bags tossed onto the public sidewalk, you might want to hurry. Chloe staggered backward as if she had been physically struck by an invisible force. The smug, entitled sneer that had defined her entire personality melted off her face, replaced by a mask of absolute, unadulterated terror. She looked wildly from Valerie to Jamal, waiting for him to contradict the lawyer, waiting for him to produce a miracle. But Jamal was paralyzed, staring at the concrete driveway with blank, unseeing eyes, while Connor continued to hurl curses at him. The reality of the police physically removing her designer clothes and furniture from the townhouse was finally settling into her brain. She was entirely exposed. Brenda recognized the total collapse of her family's front line. The financial intimidation had failed. The legal threats had failed. Her son was exposed as a complete fraud. But Brenda was a woman who had built her entire identity on moral superiority. If she could not win with money, she would win with holy terror. She pushed her way past the weeping Tasha and the catatonic Jamal marching right up to the iron gate. She planted her feet wide, her chest heaving, and pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "You listen to me, you wicked, spiteful woman!" Brenda spat, her voice vibrating with a terrifying righteous fury. "You think you have won because you control the bank accounts. You think money makes you untouchable. But you have forgotten the power of the Lord. You have forgotten your place." I stood perfectly still, watching her hyperventilate. Valerie folded her arms, looking at Brenda with mild clinical amusement. "I will destroy you in the eyes of God and this community," Brenda screamed, her voice echoing loudly enough to make the watching neighbors step closer to their property lines. "I will march into Fellowship Grace Megachurch this Sunday. I will stand before Pastor Higgins and the entire congregation of 5,000 people. I will tell them how you abandoned your husband. I will tell them how you threw a child out onto the street. I will demand that the Board of Elders publicly excommunicate you for your vindictive, barren heart. You will never be able to show your face in this city again. You will be a pariah. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monster you really are." She stood breathing heavily, her eyes wide and wild, waiting for the threat of total social and religious annihilation to bring me to my knees. For 30 years, Brenda had ruled her social circle through church gossip and spiritual intimidation. It was her ultimate weapon. I looked at her flushed, triumphant face, and then I laughed. It was not a quiet chuckle. It was a loud, genuine, echoing laugh that rolled across the manicured lawns of my neighborhood. It was the sound of a woman who had spent years biting her tongue, finally letting go. Brenda physically recoiled, her triumphant glare shattering into utter confusion. "You are not going to stand before the congregation this Sunday, Brenda," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear through the morning air. "You are never going to step foot inside Fellowship Grace again." Brenda opened her mouth to shout another scripture, but I stepped right up to the iron bars, bringing my face inches from hers. "Do you really think I spent the last 3 years auditing my own companies and ignored where Jamal was spending his free time?" I asked softly, my words striking her like individual blows. Jamal sat on the church finance committee. He was the golden boy of the board of elders. He managed the outreach funds and the building campaigns. Did you honestly believe he was doing that out of the goodness of his heart? Jamal let out a pathetic, strangled sound from the driveway. He lunged forward, grabbing his mother's arm, trying to pull her away from the gate. "Mom, stop!" Jamal begged, his voice cracking. "Mom, please just get in the car. We have to go. We have to leave right now." But Brenda was frozen, staring at me with a creeping, dreadful realization. "He skimmed the offering plates, Brenda," I stated, my voice completely devoid of mercy. "He set up ghost vendors for church repairs that never happened, and routed the invoices right into the same shell company he used to lease Chloe's townhouse. He stole $50,000 from the youth ministry fund to cover his margin calls. And when he realized he was going to get caught, he tried to quietly cover the deficit using my corporate accounts." Brenda stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her a pale, sickly gray. I did not wait for Sunday. I continued delivering the final fatal strike. At 8 o'clock this morning, my legal team sent a private courier directly to Pastor Higgins and the Board of Elders. We handed them a complete bound dossier. It contains the fraudulent lease documents, the wire transfers, the fake invoices, and the exact routing numbers showing how your son embezzled church tithes to fund his luxury lifestyle. Brenda staggered backward, her hand flying to her chest. "They are holding an emergency board meeting as we speak," I said, watching her entire world burn to ash. "Your VIP parking spot is gone. Your front row pew is gone. Your title as a platinum pillar of the community is gone. Your son is not just broke, Brenda. He is a thief who stole from God to buy designer watches, and the entire congregation knows it. They are voting on whether to press federal charges right now." Brenda's knees buckled. She let out a high, thin wail, a sound of pure, agonizing devastation, and collapsed onto the hot concrete of the driveway. Connor and Tasha stared at Jamal in absolute horror, backing away from him as if he were radioactive. Jamal stood completely frozen, his eyes locked on the ground, a man utterly destroyed by his own hubris. The profound silence that followed was suddenly shattered by a blood-curdling scream. Chloe had been standing near the back of the car, clutching Aaliyah's hand. She had listened to the entire exchange. She had heard the finality in my voice. She realized that the shell company was gone, the church bailout was gone, the fake wealth was gone. There was no secret account. There was no hidden cash. She was homeless, broke, and entirely out of options. She completely lost her mind. Chloe dropped Aaliyah's hand and sprinted toward the gate. She moved with feral, desperate speed, her face twisted into a mask of pure, violent rage. She lunged at the iron bars, thrusting her arms through the narrow gaps, her manicured nails hooking into the air as she tried to physically claw at my face. "You ruined my life!" Chloe shrieked, her voice tearing her throat as she thrashed against the heavy steel. "You psychotic witch! You ruined everything! You took my house!" She did not even make it within 3 feet of me. The 2 private security guards moved with terrifying practiced efficiency. They did not shout or draw weapons. The guard on the left simply stepped forward, clamped a massive hand onto Chloe's shoulder, and shoved her backward. The force of the push sent Chloe stumbling away from the gate. She lost her footing in her expensive sandals and crashed hard onto the driveway, scraping her knees and palms against the rough pavement. The guard stepped back into position, crossing his arms, his face completely expressionless. Chloe sat on the concrete, her designer clothes scuffed and dirty, her chest heaving. Mascara ran in dark, messy rivers down her cheeks. She looked up at me, her chest heaving with manic, desperate breaths. She pointed a shaking finger at Aaliyah, who was standing by the car, weeping silently in terror. "You made a child homeless!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Look at what you did to my daughter. You ruined a little girl's life just to get back at me. You are a monster." I looked at Chloe sitting in the dirt. I looked at the weeping child. I looked at the broken, miserable family scattered across my driveway. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. I walked forward until my shoes touched the edge of the gate. I looked down at Chloe, my eyes like chips of black ice. I didn't ruin her life. "Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly steady, carrying no emotion whatsoever. "You chose to live off another woman's back instead of standing on your own 2 feet. Time to get a job." I did not wait for her response. I did not look at Jamal. I turned my back on the wreckage of their family, walked across the pristine slate tiles of my porch, and stepped inside my beautiful, quiet house. Valerie followed closely behind me, stepping over the threshold. I pulled the heavy mahogany door shut. The latch clicked into place, locking them out forever. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut. It was a firm, solid sound that instantly severed the hysterical screaming from my serene reality. I stood in the quiet foyer for a moment, listening to the muffled, chaotic protests fading away outside the thick glass. Valerie immediately walked over to the kitchen island, opened her sleek leather briefcase, and began laying out the divorce petition documents. We did not celebrate. We did not pour another glass of wine. We simply went to work treating the destruction of my marriage as exactly what it was, a hostile corporate takeover. 90 days later, the landscape of my life was entirely unrecognizable. The divorce proceedings were not a battle or a negotiation. They were a systematic, highly sanitized slaughter. Jamal had initially attempted to hire a high-profile defense attorney, relying on his usual aggressive bravado and charm to secure premium representation. He quickly discovered a harsh truth about the legal world. Prestige law firms do not work on credit, and they certainly do not work for men whose assets have been frozen by federal fraud investigations. He ended up sitting across the table from Valerie, accompanied by a severely overworked public defender. The man took one look at Valerie's mountain of incontrovertible financial evidence, saw the paper trail of stolen funds, and advised Jamal to surrender unconditionally. Jamal was stripped to the absolute bone. Valerie filed emergency motions to completely sever my financial liability from his fraudulent enterprises, leaving him entirely exposed to his creditors. But the divorce settlement was the absolute least of his problems. The property management company that owned Chloe's former townhouse did not take kindly to corporate identity theft. When they discovered Jamal had forged signatures and falsified my holding company documents to secure the lease, they bypassed civil court and went straight to the district attorney. They pressed severe criminal charges. He was facing multiple counts of felony fraud and grand larceny. The ongoing investigation meant his name and mugshot were plastered across local business journals and community watch blogs. The consulting industry, which relies entirely on pristine reputation and absolute discretion, permanently blacklisted him. The man who had worn custom $3,000 suits and sneered at my career was now facing potential prison time, completely unemployable, and living indefinitely in his mother's basement. Chloe experienced a free fall from luxury that was breathtaking in its speed and severity. The eviction from the townhouse was absolute and unapologetic. Without Jamal's stolen funds or my flawless credit to prop her up, she was forced to confront the actual value of her own independence. It amounted to very little. She bounced between the guest rooms of reluctant friends for a few weeks, dragging Aaliyah along before burning those bridges with her relentless entitlement and refusal to contribute. Eventually, the harsh reality of her situation forced her hand. She moved into a tiny, poorly ventilated two-bedroom apartment complex directly next to a roaring interstate highway. To pay the rent, the woman who used to mock my work ethic and brag about being a full-time mother was forced to take an entry-level retail job at a discount department store. I heard through the legal grapevine that she spent her days folding clearance sweaters under harsh fluorescent lights. Her designer acrylic nails were chipped and broken. Her expensive highlights faded into brassy roots, and her arrogant smirk was permanently erased by the crushing daily weight of minimum wage survival. She had to deal with rude customers who treated her exactly the way she used to treat me. The collateral damage spread through Jamal's family like a perfectly engineered virus. Brenda suffered a social death that was far more agonizing to her than any physical ailment or financial ruin. The Board of Elders at Fellowship Grace Megachurch did not hesitate to act on the evidence I provided. Presented with the undeniable proof of Jamal embezzling youth ministry tithes, they quietly but forcefully demanded Brenda's immediate resignation from every single committee she chaired. The women in the congregation who used to hang on her every word, who used to praise her spiritual guidance, now crossed the street to avoid her. She lost her VIP parking spot. She lost her reserved front row pew. She lost the adulation that fed her toxic, inflated ego. Brenda became a ghost in her own community. She was too deeply humiliated to attend Sunday services, hiding behind the drawn curtains of her suburban house, trapped 24 hours a day, with the son who had ruined her pristine reputation. The phone that used to ring constantly with church gossip was now completely silent. Tasha and Connor's fragile materialistic marriage imploded the exact second the free money evaporated. Connor had built his entire masculine identity on providing a lavish lifestyle he could not actually afford. He had been secretly relying on Tasha to beg Jamal for my cash to cover their massive monthly deficits. Once the bank accounts were locked and the humiliating truth was exposed on my driveway, the illusion shattered permanently. Connor did not stay to attend marriage counseling. He did not vow to work through the hardship. He filed for divorce less than a month later, citing irreconcilable differences. In truth, he was simply furious that Tasha could no longer subsidize his luxury car leases and expensive hobbies. The repo men came for the Mercedes SUV 2 weeks after the driveway confrontation, towing it away while the neighbors watched. Tasha was left completely alone, drowning in massive credit card debt she could not pay. She had no choice but to pack her bags and move back into Brenda's increasingly crowded, miserable house. The entire toxic ecosystem they had built on my back had completely collapsed without my financial spine to hold it upright. They were all back exactly where they started, feeding off each other, in a cramped suburban house stripped of their fake wealth and false superiority. I did not revel in their misery. I did not stalk their social media pages or drive past their miserable new living arrangements to gloat. I simply acknowledged their ruin as the natural mathematical consequence of balancing the ledger. I had spent years pouring my energy, my money, and my soul into a black hole of ungrateful parasites. Now the account was finally settled. The deficit was cleared. On a crisp, bright Tuesday morning, I sat at the expansive glass conference table in Valerie's downtown office. The sprawling, empty property in Atlanta that had represented my subjugation and their entitlement had been listed on the market for less than a week. It sold over asking price to a corporate executive transferring from Chicago. I picked up the heavy gold pen Valerie offered me and signed my name on the final closing documents. With that single stroke of ink, the last physical tie to that life was completely severed. The massive funds from the sale were wired directly into an offshore trust that only I controlled, secured behind walls of corporate privacy that Jamal could never even dream of penetrating. I stood up, smoothed the jacket of my tailored suit, shook Valerie's hand, and walked out of the high-rise building. The city air felt remarkably clean in my lungs. I drove back to my temporary luxury rental overlooking the water. I did not hire movers. I did not pack boxes of useless sentimental items. I walked into the bedroom, opened a single pristine designer suitcase, and packed only what I needed. I left the rest of the past exactly where it belonged. The atmosphere inside the Delta VIP first-class lounge at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was a masterclass in curated tranquility. Soft, ambient jazz played from hidden speakers, blending seamlessly with the muted, polite conversations of executives and foreign dignitaries. Through the massive panoramic windows, the morning sun illuminated the sprawling Atlanta tarmac, casting a warm, golden glow over the private jets and commercial airliners preparing for departure. I sat in a plush, high-backed leather chair facing the runway, completely immersed in the profound, unbroken silence of my new reality. 3 months had passed since the heavy mahogany door of my former home had clicked shut, locking out the frantic, pathetic screams of the people who had tried to break me. In that time, the legal slaughter had been swift, surgical, and absolute. The sprawling, toxic ecosystem they had built on my back had completely disintegrated. The noise, the manipulation, and the constant draining demands were gone, replaced by a luxurious, impenetrable peace. I raised a crystal flute of vintage champagne to my lips, savoring the crisp, dry taste. I caught my reflection in the polished glass of the window. I looked completely unrecognizable from the woman I had been a year ago. The permanent tension that used to grip my jaw was entirely gone. The exhaustion that used to shadow my eyes had been replaced by a bright, radiant clarity. I was wearing a pristine, tailored silk suit that draped perfectly across my shoulders, radiating the kind of effortless, unbothered power that cannot be faked. I was unburdened. I was entirely free. A discreet, soft vibration against the glass table broke my reverie. I glanced down at my phone, the screen illuminated with a secure notification from my private offshore banking portal. I tapped the screen, opening the encrypted message. The final wire transfer had just cleared. It was the massive 9-figure payout from the business acquisition I had been quietly orchestrating behind the scenes while Jamal and his family were busy squabbling over stolen pennies and fake designer bags. I stared at the staggering string of numbers on the screen. The wealth I possessed now was exponential, vast enough to render me completely untouchable for the rest of my life. I was thriving, richer and more successful than I had ever been. I did not smile with greed. I simply locked the screen, slid the phone into my purse, and took another slow, deeply satisfying sip of champagne. Excuse me. The voice was smooth, deep, and conversational. I turned my head slowly. A man had taken the leather seat across from my table. He was exceptionally handsome, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that spoke of quiet generational wealth. He signaled the lounge bartender for a bourbon before turning his full attention to me. He had been watching me from across the room, clearly drawn by the unmistakable aura of absolute peace that surrounded me. "I hope you do not mind my intrusion," he said, offering a charming, relaxed smile. "But I have been sitting over there answering stressful emails for the last hour, and I could not help but notice you. You look like you have the entire world perfectly figured out." I rested my champagne flute on my knee, meeting his gaze with cool, calm amusement. I did not shift my posture. I did not break eye contact. "It is a recent development," I replied, my voice rich and entirely steady. He chuckled, taking the glass of bourbon the bartender handed him. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes reflecting genuine intrigue. "Well, whatever your secret is, you wear it incredibly well. Are you traveling for business or pleasure today?" I let the question hang in the air for one perfect suspended moment. My mind briefly flashed to the image of Chloe clocking into an entry-level retail shift under harsh fluorescent lights. I thought of Brenda hiding behind the drawn blinds of her suburban house, too disgraced to show her face in public. I thought of Jamal, broke, blacklisted, and facing criminal charges, staring blankly at the walls of his mother's basement. The contrast between their miserable self-inflicted ruin and my brilliant sunlit future was the greatest payoff I could have ever orchestrated. I looked back at the handsome stranger. I gave him a slow, serene smile, the ultimate picture of power and victory. "Just pleasure," I answered softly. "I recently dropped about 200 pounds of dead weight. I am celebrating." The man raised his eyebrows, a look of profound respect crossing his features as he raised his glass to me in a silent toast. I finished the last drop of my champagne and set the crystal flute down on the table with a definitive clink. I stood up, my movements fluid and graceful, and grasped the handle of my single sleek designer suitcase. I did not look back at the man. I did not look back at the sprawling city of Atlanta, stretching out beyond the airport windows. I walked with measured, commanding steps toward the boarding gate for my first-class flight to the Maldives, leaving the ashes of their fake empire thousands of miles behind me. The ultimate lesson from this story is that true security never comes from conforming to a toxic family's expectations or living in someone else's shadow. Financial independence is your greatest armor against manipulation. When you stop seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim your power. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, and sometimes walking away is not an act of surrender, but the ultimate victory. Blood does not excuse abuse, and building your own empire is the best revenge. Please share your own toxic family survival stories below and subscribe today.